Steam has come a long way from just being Half-Life 1's DRM system. It was pretty awful back then. Eventually, Steam would open up and become a marketplace. But fundamentally, seeing videos like Jim Sterling's most recent Jimquisition, it's very clear that both indie developers and people in the media don't understand Valve's objective. And this, of course, isn't a defense of Valve. We'll get to skewering them a little later on. However, I thought I'd just go over why some of these concerns aren't even on Valve's radar anymore. So as I mentioned, Steam started off as just a DRM system for Half-Life, and it was pretty damn bad, actually. We started off with the WAN authentication service, which did its job perfectly. I don't know why they decommissioned it. Maybe because there was some piracy going on. I have no idea. It did its job when I shared a copy of Half-Life with one of my friends. That friend was unable to play online if I logged in first, and I thought that was absolutely fine. But then Steam came in and ruined everything. It took a good 45 minutes to update on average, and the updates would just happen spontaneously. We couldn't really control game version like we used to because things would auto-update. And this caused some pretty major issues for Half-Life, where I had tons and tons of mods that I enjoyed playing that suddenly I couldn't play anymore as reliably. Eventually, Steam would get easier to use. It would take up less resources. It would just become better overall. However, no one liked DRM. No one likes DRM now. And if you ask the major companies, they will say DRM doesn't work and then promptly add de novo to their games. So that shows the dual-sided logic of the industry as it stands. Unless, of course, you go to GOG, Good Old Games, and you can get tons of DRM-free games, including The Witcher 3. I recommend going and checking it out. Either way, Steam, over time, added more and more games from third-party sources. The crazy thing is that these games, there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to how people could get their games onto Steam. Obviously, AAA publishers were able to get a hold of Valve, but for the most part, indie developers, some of them had connections and got their stuff on Steam right away. Others would try for months to get someone from Valve to take notice, and there was no consistency. So to correct this, Steam instituted the Steam Greenlight program, which ended up gamifying the whole system of what got on Steam. Ideally, a voting system would be ideal because then you get an idea of buyer interest. But things that made it onto Greenlight didn't necessarily sell. And it was just an awkward system altogether that ended up promoting vote sharing and all kinds of crazy stuff. Digital Homicide was a product of this system, where you gamified your voting. And Digital Homicide games made it onto Steam, these asset flips, as Valve internally called them, fake games, made their way onto Steam because they managed to gamify the voting process. They would offer people incentives, free CD keys, things like that, for votes. And then they would sell the games in order to get into the Steam trading card racket. Steam Greenlight was an abject failure because high-quality, complete games couldn't get the votes they needed, but fake games, as they called it, could get on. And for the indie developer, their hope to get on Steam wasn't necessarily to take advantage of the Steam platform because Valve takes 30% of the profits. I mean, if a place to host and sell the game was all they cared about, then these indie developers could have used their own websites using PayPal. PayPal takes a 2% cut instead of the 30% cut that Steam would. So why? Why would indie developers continue to go after Steam? It's the exposure, specifically under the new releases tab. The new releases section of the main page was where you could get your game showcased, and there'd be a big burst of sales during the new releases period, and then it'd get pushed down by other games and disappear off the page. And then you just get residuals over time. And it's very unfortunate because there are some really good games that never got the attention on Steam that they deserve. And one of them is Skeleton Boomerang. I mentioned this earlier. I was given a free copy of it because it is not something to look at that I would have ever thought to cover. I did a live stream with it about a couple months back, and I really do want to get a review up. I'll probably push that review up tomorrow or the next day if I can. But these are games that you just glance at and you wouldn't even give the time of day. These are things that aren't worth the time, but it turns out they are fully fleshed out experiences that indie developers work painstakingly to present to us. And then nothing. They just get overshadowed by more and more new releases. Well, the Steam Discovery Queue has changed that. Steam now uses algorithms to track what kind of games you play. And by using this algorithm, they're able to deliver to you more game recommendations based on what you've previously searched for and what you own and what you've played the most, and what your friends own. All this data is used to offer a discovery queue to you where you can find games that you potentially like. This discovery queue, however, is very problematic for people like Jim Sterling or other people who have made a go of these asset flips, or as Valve calls them, these fake games. The people who frequented these fake games, who went to every single one of Digital Homicide's stuff in order to downvote it or to, leave a nasty comment after buying the game, those people ultimately are served up by the algorithm as being interested in that type of game. They are not the majority, however, to someone who has invested a considerable amount of time and effort to clean up the Steam platform, like Jim Sterling was trying to do, it makes sense that his discovery queue is just chocked full of these fake games, whereas someone like myself never sees a single one on my discovery queue. That's because I'm fairly frugal about what games I buy. And that being frugal has led me to miss quite a few games that have now recently had developers come to me and say, hey, would you like to cover my game? And I really wish I had more time to be able to do these things because some of these games are worth covering. A la Skeleton Boomerang, Rock of Ages, things of that nature. But in the sense of Steam being bogged down with worthless fake games, Steam can have all the games it wants. It can have an infinite number of products for sale. And on average, only a tiny percentile of people will actually ever see these fake games in their discovery queue. And that's because people will be looking for highly rated things in their categories of choice. If you choose to look for these asset flips and low-rated games with no sales, that's on you. You should have clicked the I'm not interested button, and that's it. The only reason they're somewhat propped up is because of the Steam trading card market. But with the new rules of Steam Direct, that market has been heavily gutted. The whole system of Steam Direct has allowed a flood of games, mostly crap, to be put out. Now, someone like Total Biscuit, for example, who's trying to cover all the new releases and is sifting through game after game after game trying to find something good in order to talk about on his podcast, I imagine he could be really put off by this. But we've entered an age now where Valve wants to just let anyone on the Steam platform for any reason. I think that this is fine. because I have not encountered, again, any of these fake games. Here's the problem indie developers are having: a discovery queue for new releases. Previously, new releases used to be a upfront showcase where your new game is getting shown off to the world. And it's amazing because we never had this discoverability before. And it means that we immediately have a free pass to make anywhere from a tiny amount of money to a giant amount of money just in a burst. And then our game fades into obscurity, obviously. That window no longer exists under the current Steam platform at all. The new releases section has been replaced with its own discovery queue. This discovery queue uses algorithms just like everything else. That means if you create an indie game and it goes up on Steam, but it's in a niche genre that no one's interested in, there will be no impetus for the algorithm to show your game over any other game. The original release queue was obliterated, doesn't exist anymore. Now it's all based on this algorithm, but because Steam knows that I play open world collectathon type games, it's going to serve up those for twice, 3 times, maybe even 10 times longer. That release list is going to show those games that are more applicable to me for longer. But the games that weren't applicable to me as far as the algorithm goes are never served in the first place. So that entire impetus people had to put out their games at a specific time and then hope that a bunch of people buy them before it falls off the list, that whole strategy has been invalidated. It's an entirely new business model where you, the game developer, are responsible for driving traffic to your game if it's in a niche genre that a bunch of other people aren't interested in, because the Steam algorithm's purpose is to serve up content that it thinks you want to buy. In my case, it's a lot of Japanese cartoon games, it's a lot of 2D side-scrolling platformers, and it's a lot of collectathon open-world games. A few shooters on occasion, but I don't get served up shooters that frequently because it turns out I haven't bought one in quite a while. I believe that the Doom 2016 was the last shooter I added to my list there. The idea of Steam being this exclusive place for only certain games, that's going away. So if you have a game that is in a genre other people play and has user-defined tags that other people like, the algorithm takes all of that into account and serves up the game as a potential, you should buy this. That's the way the system works now. I don't dislike it, but I do feel sorry for everyone who has gone on Jim Sterling's little crusade, going after all the fake games, going after all the crap, buying the crap potentially, or just browsing it on a frequent basis because now the algorithm has tied their Steam accounts with this stuff. If they're smart, they'll hit I'm not interested, I'm not interested, I'm not interested. If they followed any of the pages, they should unfollow them immediately. They should click I'm not interested on each of these things that are being served up, and they should hit follow on a bunch of things that they do want. Working against the system is going to cause the system to work against you. And for people like Jim Sterling, who is now obsessed with critiquing Steam because of the way it handles its algorithm, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. Because they've opened the floodgates, they will allow almost anything in. His news regarding Steam Direct stuff is the same as saying, did you know the ocean is wet, the trees very often have leaves on them, and the dirt can make dust if you kick it? That's basically what his videos at this point are saying. Whilst his fight against the Steam Greenlight scams was admirable, his victory over Digital Homicide was bittersweet because ultimately, while Digital Homicide is gone, a bunch of other companies were already doing what they were doing, and he never got to properly cover those companies. I would say that Steam is doing a good job with its algorithm. It's just they're not doing what indie developers who want quick discovery want. And they're not doing what Jim Sterling wants, is to put these scumbags out of business, the fake game developers. The fake games, their discovery rate, lower than ever. Looking at the way the algorithm is meant to be used and hopping onto my Steam account to look for things that I want to buy on this last Steam sale, I didn't see anything that offended me. Of course, I like those weeaboo games, so what can I say? What does offend me, however, is the way that Steam games, older ones specifically, can't even be run properly on newer systems. Now, thankfully, GOG has versions of most of those games which do work on modern systems because GOG actually patches things. Thank God for GOG, good old games. I have many other complaints about Steam, but the algorithm and Steam Direct are not among those. Neither is the discovery queue for new releases. I could see if I was a new developer, depending on that window, I'd be pissed. But as a consumer, I'm happy. I would like to drive traffic to some of the more obscure games, so I'm going to be starting off with Skeleton Boomerang later this week, tomorrow or the next day. And if I can, I very much want to start covering more. You can find contact information on my Twitter, twitter.com/Zarek. Feel free to pitch me your indie games, and if they're for the most part complete and not just alpha tests, I might very well showcase them. Or I might get too busy and, not do that. So I might as well wrap this thing up with thank God for GOG games. Seriously, go check out that website if you haven't already. There's a lot of really good games like Ravenloft and tons of Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms. All kinds of good games to check out. I'll probably do a list of my favorite old GOG games at some point. But for now, thank y'all for watching. Check the links on screen for more content, and I will see y'all next time.
Conan, the mightiest warrior ever, his quest vanquishing their leader, the cruel wizard Rapamon.